very good morning to our honorable guest speakers and fellow participants. Welcome to our legal webinar episode 2 today. Our topic is the legal perspective of domestic violence in Malaysia. My name is Ng Siwei and I'll be the moderator as for today. Now, please allow me to introduce our guest speakers, which are Mr. Goh Yong Han, Ms. Grace Michelle Philip, Ms. Beverley Idle Andrew, Ms. Tan Sin Mei, and Ms. NURUL SYAMIMI binti Nora Slant. Before we proceed to our sharing session, let me introduce the background of domestic violence with you. Domestic violence is a major public health problem. It has affected more than 2 million women and 800,000 men. It is a pattern of violence, abuse, or intimidation used to control or maintain power over a partner who is or has been in an intimate relationship. Abusers often use more than one form of abuse to invoke fear or coerce a partner to behave in ways they don't want to. Domestic violence is a behavioral pattern and it always happens in cycles, as abusers may use different tactics to establish power and control. My first question is directed to Mr. Goh Yong Han. Can you enlighten us with the types and causes of domestic violence?
Okay, thank you for the question, Ms. Hui. Okay, domestic violence can occur in many ways. Firstly, we can see physical abuse. Physical abuse is an act causing hurt to another person by way of bodily contact. For example, hitting, slapping, kicking, or even strangling a person. For emotional abuse, normally the abuser will use words to humiliate, criticize, or embarrass another person to wear down their self-esteem and undermine their mental health. For sexual abuse, it is an abusive sexual behavior by the abuser upon another. The abuser will intimidate the victim to engage in sexual practice in which the victim does not want to participate. Next, isolation is another form of abuse by controlling the victim's movement or preventing them from visiting, seeing, or speaking to family members or friends. Moreover, the abuser might also threats to hurt or harm the victim in order to control the victims to fulfill his request. On the other hand, the economic abuse happens when the abuser restricts the victim's financial freedom by refusing to give sufficient money for household expenses or taking away the victim's income. Last but not least, stalking is also a form of abuse in which the abuser repeatedly displays harassing behavior, including following or showing up at the victim's home or workplace, making harassing phone call or sending threatening messages on social media, for example through WhatsApp. You might also ask, what are the factors that make abusers engage in domestic violence? First of all, from the aspect of power and control, the abuser are usually self-centered people. They control their family members through violence, they make all the major decisions and mistreat their partners just for the sake of enjoyment of exercising power and control. In terms of family factors, the abuser usually raised in an abusive family. They are one of the victims. They may have experienced family violence in their childhood and learn violent behavior from their family. Besides, social factors such as education, income, wealth, and related conditions to the living and working environment are also strongly linked to violence. Lastly, abuser might also suffer from psychological problems and have personal disorder which are associated with severe mood swings, substance abuse, or suicidal behavior. That's all from me.
Thank you, Mr. Goh. Next, I would like to ask Ms. Grace, what are the effects of domestic violence?
Okay, thank you for the question. Domestic violence doesn't only affect the victim, but all parties involved, that include the children and the abuser itself. Now, let's take a look at the effect from the victim perspective. Mostly, for a victim, they tend to have a low self-esteem and lack of confidence. Also, the feeling of shame, guilt, and fear is instilled in their mind. And worst of all, they will suffer a mental breakdown that will lead to depression and have suicidal thoughts. Okay, as for the child of the broken family, the children will always be in fear, insecure, and lose the feeling of dependency on their parents. The children are constantly frustrated and anxious as well. The common problem is they will be involved with problems in school and have a deep anger boiled up inside them. While the effect of the abuser is the abuser may face may face a family breakdown, separation, or divorce from their spouse, as well as getting punishment by law for their act of violence. So that's basically the effect of violence in family. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Grace. Miss Beverley, may I know how the Penal Code governs the issues of domestic violence?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Ng. Penal Code plays an important role with the issues of domestic violence as it provides punishment for the abusers and perpetrators. The punishment for domestic violence varies and depending on the nature of the offense. The Domestic Violence Act, which defines domestic violence and provides protection orders, is read together with the Penal Code, which outlines punishments for various offenses. An example of a charge for domestic violence is Section 323 of the Penal Code, which provides punishment for voluntarily causing hurt, and it carries a punishment of imprisonment for up to 1 year or a fine of up to 2,000 ringgit or both. In addition, Section 326A of the Penal Code also provides that anyone who causes hurt to one's spouse and commits an offense under Section 323, 324, 325, 326, 334, or 335 of the Penal Code will be imprisoned for a term up to twice as long as the maximum term of these offenses. For example, if a perpetrator is charged under Section 323 of the Penal Code for causing hurt to a spouse, the perpetrator will be imprisoned for up to 2 years instead of up to 1 year and may also be fined up to 2,000 ringgit. For example, in the case of Chan Amoy versus Pang Ai Wai An, the defendant behaved unreasonably to such an extent that the petitioner could not stand the sight of him. They decided to live separately at 2 separate residences and did so for 8 years. Despite the separation, the petitioner continued to be abused, including being attacked with a long knife, and it caused her to suffer serious injuries. The defendant was arrested and convicted under Section 326 of Penal Code and sentenced to 4.5 years imprisonment. That is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Beverley. Miss Tan Sin Lei, apart from the Penal Code, do we have any other legislation that governs the issue of domestic violence?
Thank you for your question, Ms. Ng. So the Domestic Violence Act provides greater protection to the victim with immediate intervention and close supervision. The type of relief which are available to the victim are an emergency protection order, interim protection order, and a protection order. An emergency protection order is an order issued by the social welfare officer instructing the proprietor to stop committing acts of violence towards the victim. It can be applied at the social welfare department, and an emergency protection order can be applied before an interim protection order or protection order. Besides, a victim may apply to the court for an interim protection order prohibiting the abuser from inflicting violence pursuant to Section 4 of the Domestic Violence Act 1994. Furthermore, the protection order may be granted by the court in proceeding involving a complaint of domestic violence. According to Section 5, Subsection 1 of the Domestic Violence Act 1994, the court may grant a protection order restraining the abuser from inflicting domestic violence against the complainant child and against the incapacitated adult. In short, the court can further impose conditions with these orders to ensure that the victim is protected, treated, and compensated accordingly. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tan. My last question is for Ms. SYAMIMI. May I know what kind of remedy is entitled by a person who is threatened by domestic violence?
Okay, thank you, moderator. Okay, for the wife which is suffering as the victim of domestic violence, the wife may sue for tort action in regard of her personal injuries. As we can see in Section 4A of Married Women Act 1957, allowed the wife to seek for tort action from her husband for the damages of the personal injuries she had suffered. And as in the compensation, Section 10 of Domestic Violence Act, the court may vest the victim with compensation for personal injuries as well as other damages of property or financial loss. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. SYAMIMI and the panel of speakers. Before the end of our legal webinar, I would like to share some hotlines that might help in case you are facing a domestic violence issue, which are Talian Kasih 15999 and Women AIDS Organization Hotline 03308888. Both hotlines are 24 hours available. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Take care and stay safe.